Hi, this is Mark Lynn. I want to welcome you to the Innovative Strategies for Dealing with Remote Work and Ransomware. Today, we'll be discussing innovative strategies. In dealing with remote work and ransomware, especially during COVID-19, it's been really kind of crazy. So, we have a really special guest, Ray White. Hi, Ray.
Hey, Mark, great to be here.
Absolutely. So, Ray White is the FlexPod data center leader for the South area of NetApp. He has 21 years of industry experience in information technology software, hardware, sale, and services. Ray has been with NetApp since 2005 and has achieved some of the highest levels of consistent performance throughout his tenure in both sales and technical leadership. You may have heard of him as he goes by FlexRay. I like that
Thanks,
nickname.
Mark.
I love that nickname, FlexRay. That was fantastic. Welcome, Ray, again. And obviously we're emerging from some, or hopefully we're emerging from some pretty tough times. We've seen the rapid rise of remote work. We've seen ransomware continue to be a scourge and in many ways used COVID-19 to even impact more organizations and more people globally. It's really kind of changed the face of our society and how organizations operate. So, many people are trying to wonder what other innovations and what things can they do to work around this and to be better prepared. Should this go on longer or should there be a second or even third wave? I know you often speak publicly about ransomware strategies. So given the pandemic and the growth of ransomware, what challenges are impacting an organization's ransomware strategy?
Mark, it's a great question. We watch the world press a button and all of a sudden work from home. And now work from home has become work from anywhere for indefinite amounts of time. So let's classify what we've done so far. We've poked holes in our firewalls that didn't exist. We've opened up internet traffic and bandwidth unbelievable amounts. We've seen a factor of 3x in terms of increase in internet traffic. That right there, Mark, is more chaos, and that chaos becomes opportunity for the bad guys. Other things that we've seen, Mark, as businesses said, hey, you know what? I'm going to spin up cloud resources and do remote desktop and VDI. We all learned quickly there are new infrastructure implications that weren't out there before, such as there's a big difference between doing VDI and enterprise-grade end-user computing at scale. And those things typically land around ransomware because a lot of the conversations we're having are, do you have a ransomware strategy? And a lot of times we get hope, unfortunately. And while hope is not a strategy, my friend, we are trying to help people navigate this tough time. What's Netsync doing about that? What have you guys seen?
Well, interestingly enough, both in public and private sector, we've seen quite a bit of chaos, but we've also seen some organizations really rise from that. And interesting, the public sector took a real beating with ransomware from that kind of February to right now. You've seen it over and over. You saw where University of California paid, 1.1 million. Now we found out a big university in New York, and it goes on and on and on. And so what we're seeing is, because of that rapid rise, because of that sudden, need and the scale of it, it really impacted many organizations' ability to do work. And now what we're seeing them do is they've now kind of recovered from that, or they were able to work their way through that and use their business continuity and all that. We're seeing them now start to add to that. So, what if most of the people don't come back? What do we do? How do we prepare for that? How do we train them? How do we have our leadership still communicate effectively? How do we work with our customers? So we're seeing some really interesting things going on. But we've seen some really bad responses, and we've seen some really strong responses.
Interesting. Mark, we saw the same. We watched the city of Maryland be impacted for over a month. Heck, the city of Atlanta was writing power bills on paper for 30 days. Honda lost operations at manufacturing plants, and bad guys are bad guys for a reason, right? Let's face it, they don't have a moral code. That's why they're bad guys. And they're unfortunately targeting frontline workers, right? And so we saw what you said, Mark, over 120 state institutions being impacted, and we even saw a big focus on healthcare workers, right? Whether that was, nation-state actors trying to steal intellectual property, or just, again, targeting those poor frontline workers, those legacy infrastructures in SLED and healthcare specifically, we've seen that become front and center, unfortunately, for the bad guys. Have you seen pretty much the same?
I have. One interesting item to it, too, is that I find a lot of times when, in the midst of a lot of chaos, technology leaders, they look to their team to kind of help them recover. And the scrutiny they receive from, a board, if it's commercial enterprise, or, from, in higher ed, the chancellor and their board and all that. And many times it's like, well, what are you going to do? You should have been prepared. We gave you money. We did all this. But in reality, we know that's not really how it works, right? Business continuity for most organizations prior to COVID was, hey, it's something we have to do in case we ever really need it, but we're not going to spend precious dollars and time and effort on that. But now what you're seeing is they're really starting to do that. They're really starting to spend time. They're starting to think through. They're actually running tests. We were talking to one of the three largest cities in Texas a couple of weeks ago, and they've actually run tests to go through this where they didn't do that in the prior years. So some really interesting pieces. So we have seen that. And one of the things I know you're with being at NetApp, a lot of people don't realize that your ransomware strategy really should incorporate a lot around data. And I think people think ransomware strategy is recovering your servers and getting your network back up and all this other, but there's a lot more to it. And I think some of the finer points and some of those items are missed a lot of times, or not talked about as much, maybe.
Agreed. One observation too, Mark, I find completely fascinating. For example, back in June, the Verizon data breach investigation report came out. And we all know, just the level set, that a data breach obviously would not only be a hack, but data left off-site. And ransomware is really just an incident. And they can be both in the same, of course. But the interesting thing I found, Mark, was it increased from 30% to over 40% as it related to internal threat actors. And while we look at these nation-state, again, actors attacking our country for both intellectual property and vulnerable folks, it breaks my heart to see so many insiders. Matter of fact, in the SLED space that you brought up in public sector, 43% of the attacks were from insiders, according to the Verizon data breach. I mean, just think about Chelsea Mann and Edward Snowden. They had access. They built things inside of the business. So the very first thing that we level set with is, where is my data? Who has access to it and why? And it's really just that first classification of what we call the beginning of a data strategy, back to your point. Agreed.
Yeah, it's funny. Our friends over at Twitter, they found out about insider threats and who's got access to their data this last weekend, right? So widely reported, still being talked about by many, many people because it affected some of the most wealthiest and most powerful people and organizations in the world. Talk about an impact. And that kind of leads me into my next question. How drastic did the technology and security leaders' priorities change in regard to ransomware because of COVID-19?
Interestingly, I've been telling people business transformation and digital transformation is difficult because a lot of companies are trying to figure out, what do I transform into, right? We see car companies trying to become software companies. I'm pretty sure you know who that is. We see software car companies trying to become car companies, right? It's the inverse. But unfortunately, COVID-19 has forced digital transformation on all of us, Mark. And to your point, it's an opportunity for our business leaders to rise up and lead during this difficult time. And so really, we feel that the best thing that they can do is understand that not only how prevalent it is, but how much more difficult ransomware has become. And I'd love to expand on that if you had another minute.
Please.
Yeah, so essentially, Mark, we saw the rise of ransomware 1.0, script kiddies, and all these jokes we make. You can log into, the underground and get these software as a service portals. Who's the host? Who are you trying to attack? Here's the cryptocurrency, send the IP, very basic stuff. But we watched criminal advancement in terms of syndication. Dare I say ransomware 2.0. And to elaborate on that, RDP compromise has become the number one attack sector that we've seen during this time. Just think about going back on the underground, finding a known credential, and you essentially got a backdoor into an environment. It's over 70% of the attacks that we've seen, according to the empirical data presented by Forrester, Gartner, IDC, you name it. Everybody's echoing that statement. And so what are our businesses doing? We're saying harden your environment. And particularly around the NetApp story, I'm proud of it, Mark, because I'm one of 12 members on our global product security team. We've been really trying to help customers over the last 10 years take best practices and features from the industry to harden, dare I say, the most critical component of our environment, the vault of data and information. And so what can we do to think about, now that ransomware has grown to this new version, how do we detect it? how do we prevent it, and how do we remediate it? Not if, but when a business is impacted. That's kind of the new stuff that we're seeing. And it's just been very difficult for our business leaders to keep up with both the attack surfaces expanding, the increase in traffic, and all these new infrastructure implications like we're talking about today.
Yeah, it's funny when you talked about the attack surface increasing, it has, and the number of threat vectors also has increased dramatically. And it was already starting to with IoT and with other things that were going on. It was already starting to go that way. But now all of a sudden, just poof, speed and scale, reigning supreme. And it's interesting. Ransomware has also gotten a lot nastier. People don't realize, and you talked about something really important there about data security. A lot of these are now, even if you don't pay or you do pay, they still extort you. So they took some of that data, like you said, RDP, they moved that data out and they threatened to release that data, right? And so, just when you think you spent, that, and that's kind of in the IT leaders as well as the other leaders' mindset. Well, I gave you $1.5 million to go out there and, put this ransomware protection in place. So we were okay, right? No, you're not. It's an evolution. It's a moving ball. You never really get there. That journey never reaches its destination, right? And I think that's one of the struggles that we see over and over and over again around ransomware, around business continuity, around some of the things that we're talking about here. Even remote work. Remote work is not really the end of, right? Because you're adding more people. You're adding more applications. Maybe you're laying in zero trust. You're doing all these other things, and it changes how things work and how it looks. And I think the idea that you spend a certain amount 1 year and they're not going to come back to you for 2 or 3 years really is kind of out of date and not progressive enough for what it is. And that kind of leads me into my next question. How can Ray? How can organizations come out of their current situation with a more viable and secure ransomware strategy, given all that?
It's a great, yeah. So just some pragmatic advice and a follow-up as well too, Mark. We're seeing the same, that a lot of institutions, even if they pay the ransom, they're not getting their data back. And when I mentioned the word criminal syndication earlier, it was on purpose. And that's because we're seeing architectural tiers of criminals. And essentially, there's kind of a top 10 list of variants of ransomware floating out in the wild. And I mentioned the ransomware 2.0 scenario, so just to elaborate on that, Yelp-like reviews, Mark. And so they will literally contact you with a software as a service portal. And if you give me a really good review that I gave you your data back when you paid, I'll give you 10% off of your ransom right now. It's absolutely happening, right? And so our general guidance before we get into the real pragmatic stuff is to really just say, slow down when you are impacted if you are. We know that it's a very scary thing to have that happen. And to your point, it could be a hostage taking the data off site, or it could be a denial of service to just the business application. So it's critical right now, Mark, to understand what variant of the malware people are going to be facing when they are impacted. Obviously, start running logs. But if you change any of your architecture behind the scenes, as in shut down access, tip off the bad guys, or copy and clone and pray, or go to backup, unfortunately, what you're doing is you're down the stream causing further issues. So even when cryptographically you're unlocking the environment, in other words, there's a reason why Forbes says less than 10% of the people get their data back. Forrester said 19% of the people get their data back when they pay. And so I'm saying don't pay right away. And in addition to that, not just the variation of the malware, but who is the particular threat actor? And when you find one of those top 10 syndicates, you'll start to find out, hey, this is what you can expect. This is just another version, for example, of WannaCry that we've seen before. And it brings you back to so many different observations. So again, it's not if, but when. So businesses are telling us, Mark, they're escrowing six-figure amounts on the side of their budget so that when they face an impact, they can buy the crypto to unlock the environment. And so working with Netsync and NetApp, we say slow down, take a breath, give us a call. Obviously, it's a very impactful time when an incident like that's going on, but there's a lot of new questions. So not just new threats, but new questions for CIOs, CSOs, and CFOs, those types, to start asking during an attack. So I know that was a counter question for you a little bit there, but I wanted to really make sure people understood that it's not just the new surface and it's not just the new type of attacks. It's new methodologies pragmatically that we need to think about just before going ahead and escrowing in crypto, you know?
Well, it's because those are some great points, and it's a lot like life, right? It's about experience and intelligence, right, and knowledge, because a lot of people don't know the things that you just mentioned, which are really, great things, and slowing down and thinking about it. Because one of the other items, that leaps off the page is very much in the flow, but it's maybe a little bit more on the infrastructure side is once you're encrypted, even if you paid or your insurance company paid, you still have to have 1.5 times the amount of storage to decrypt too once you get to the key. And you don't realize that. And you just don't snap your fingers and the storage, voila, it shows up, right? We have to get it. If you go through Netsync, we have to order it as it come in. We got to go install it. It's got to go through its whole process. There's a lot to this. And as your point is, there's also the societal and sociological and items of this is how do they normally operate, this bad actor, this group, the syndicate, if you will, and how do I do all this? And that doesn't come by making dramatic decisions in the middle of a big chaotic situation, for sure. And I think that's one of the things that they talk to organizations like us, because we get calls. We've done many organizations that have run into this, and one of the first things we do, to your point, a great point is that slow down. Let's really determine where we're at. What is our current state? What are we trying to get to? Who are we dealing with? Have we contacted the local authorities? Have the local authorities contacted the FBI? Blah, blah, blah. There's so many things, because if you don't do that and you have insurance, you may have voided your insurance, right? They have all kinds of things in the underwriting process that you can get dropped from. So there's some really, really great pieces. I really appreciate that part. That was really fascinating. That's one of the things, part of an ongoing conversation is you get these pieces that come out that may not have been directly part of the question, answering the question, but boy, bring real value to the listeners out there. So when you think about that, organizations, they've established, or they think they've established, effective business continuity plans. But, we're seeing there's lots of challenges out there, and a lot of them are experiencing difficulty, rolling out their business continuity and supporting the organization. And on top of that, you mentioned the digital transformation impacting these businesses, moving to remote work all of a sudden, having all these other things that they weren't prepared for, weren't budgeted for, and have to go through a series of approvals and have to go out and train people how to use it. So in your mind, is there a more effective way? Is there a better way to do business continuity? I know at NetApp, you guys are a big part of a lot of people's business continuity plans.
Absolutely. So Mark, to answer that question, 10 years ago, Forrester coined a term called zero trust, and it was very network centric. And if you just think about the multi-core and the perimeter, and fundamentally our perimeter has disappeared. And we, NetApp, working with Netsync, are taking a data-centric approach to zero trust. And I got to be honest, Mark, this has become a wonderful technology, as well as, again, really good pragmatic steps and advice that you can work with. And it helps you not just look at file types, which are great for AV engines, but there's so many ways to trick antivirus or get through the firewall. But if you look at human behavior, back to our insider threat comments about where is my data, who has access to it, and why, you'll start to see, wow, look, there's data being rapidly encrypted there. Or, wow, that person's accessing something that they shouldn't have done. And so we've built, Mark, a no-cost, zero-trust detection engine to take a data-centric approach to zero trust. We feel if we recommend these steps, and if businesses were to follow these, they will not only harden their environment, but increase their resiliency during a business continuity scenario, back to your point. Because just going back to backup, I wish that was the answer nowadays, my friend, but unfortunately, we're watching polymorphic encryption algorithms that can root and worm a network really quick, and people make the mistake of putting their domain servers together with their backup environment. And so I root the network, man, I take the backup, I take the snapshots out, and essentially you're locked down. And that's assuming you know when the ransomware was planted in the environment. The no-cost, zero-trust detection engine will not only prevent those type of human behavior and pattern and file anomaly detections, but they will prevent an attack from happening in the first place. So that's really our stance on it, Mark. There's much more advice that we give pragmatically, but that's the answer to that question.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've gone out, as part of NetApp and Netsync and talked to a bunch of public sector customers because they obviously are highly impacted by this. A lot of them, they have school coming up in the fall. They got to figure out how to support all these students in higher ed and K-12. And one of the
Right.
things, but in a lot of cities, right, a lot of counties that we work with, and we've talked to them very much about how NetApp goes out there and you create snap locks, right? Especially if you're already a NetApp customer, which several of them are, and then do the Instamount and get back up in a relatively quick time, assuming that a lot of bad things happen, and to your point, you didn't expose a path for them to go in there and eradicate some of your backups and all that. So with the snap lock technology and the Instamount and all that, I think NetApp's got a really good strategy. One that we've been definitely evangelizing to our customers as part of that strategy. I'm going to start adding the engine piece, and I know you and I were talking about this the other day. I'm going to start adding that in as well, because knowing when your restore point is, doing a lot of other things, there's a lot of pieces to this, and choosing experienced manufacturers and partners is a really critical element of having a business continuity strategy that actually works.
Agreed.
So, one of the things, actually, let me rephrase this. So, given what you've seen, what advice can you share with the community and our listeners on being better prepared for the next issue or disaster? Because I know a lot of people are concerned about that, because we've kind of seen what a lot of people are calling a second wave, and then we've heard about other things going on, and you never really know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I saw an article from a very large service provider that begins with a G, and they basically said the largest ransomware attack in history is on the way. It's a little alarmist in nature, but to answer your question, Mark, we recommend architecting a data-centric approach to zero trust. Here's the very basic steps to do that. It's really easy. Identify the location of all your organizational data. Step one. Classify your data. Securely dispose of your data that you no longer need. NetApp has a technology called Secure Purge to cryptographically erase perhaps PCNMI data or credit card data or social security numbers. Think about that, where you still need the data. There's also new tactics and techniques in data science and AI, like homomorphic encryption, to protect the identity of the data and still leverage data science techniques. The fourth advice point I would say is understand what roles should have access to those data classifications. Apply the principle of least privilege to enforce the access. The old model was trust but verify, and zero trust means trust nothing and verify everything.
Right.
Use multi-factor authentication for access of administration purposes and data access. When I mentioned Honda being impacted, the manufacturer, for, again, a couple days, that was because someone manipulated the critical electronic data on the storage array. Don't worry, it wasn't NetApp. And they took the environment down just by doing that. And it's amazing to me, Mark, that storage companies are just now adding multi-factor authentication for administrative and data access. This is the big one, my friend. Use encryption for both data at rest and in flight. And when a company as a storage provider says, hey, protect the most critical layer of your storage environment, I have stealth-encrypting hard drives, that's great when people are walking around the business or walking around the data center. But we've built cryptographic modules inside of ONTAP, Mark, software encryption. These are FedRAMP ready, only FIPS level 1 because it's software, of course. But essentially, think about that. I can encrypt at the aggregate level, the volume level. That prevents encryption at provisioning, copying data between sites. And so NetApp gives you end-to-end encryption for both data at rest and in flight. And then the last ones are easy. You monitor and log all access, as we talked about, alert for any suspicious behaviors. And this is the best part. Make sure you establish a cadence of your test. Now, when you go through a difficult time like ransomware, I say, hey, you can't have a testimony if you haven't been through the test. And you don't have a plan until you've really tested, because people don't do what you expect, they do what you inspect. So it's key to have that done, maybe monthly or quarterly, depending on the sophistication of the organization. But that's what I would recommend to a business that's thinking, I love what you're saying. How do I do all that? Work with Netsync. We can get that done for you.
Yeah, it's funny, Ray. I think one of the things is a lot of people don't realize until it goes bad that they have a due care responsibility. It's not something they think about every day, but they do. They're being paid to perform a job, which is protecting an organization from, outside interruptions or ceasing to be able to continue business. And part of that due care responsibility is taking necessary steps, being some level of preparedness, right? Even if you assume some level of risk, and one of those is part of that due care is laying out, just like you just laid out, plans with steps as part of a plan, or using zero trust as a framework. A lot of these things, and we're very particular about when we talk to our clients, is ensuring that they're thinking about things besides just the technology. It's the use of the technology as well, and having a well-known plan that is tested. To your point, so that really resonated when you were going through that with me, because that is something we talk to our customers about day in and day out.
Absolutely.
So I know one of the things that you and I often get into, we both are guys that are steeped in AI and are very interested. We're also very passionate about data security. So I wanted to ask you, looking forward, are there data security and business, continuity innovations that can help close the gaps that many organizations find themselves in? Things like AI.
Yeah, that's a wonderful one, because just think about what we've seen in every single category of cybersecurity and AI emerging. We have deep fakes now where people are taking their face. You can take someone's voice and put it on, someone else's video. It's mindless and unbelievable to see those two words and worlds merge together. But particularly, think about this. Password cracking, for example. Back in the day, that was, okay, run Jack the Ripper, and let's see if I can get in my Excel document I forgot to get into, and it's very basic stuff. With GPU acceleration, Mark, particularly, GPUs have figured out how to do things that regular computers could not do. And applying that to, again, firewall, anomaly detection, pattern anomaly detection. I mean, I know so I can ask you this, but, a 1 meg firewall log is 500 pages of text. Good luck looking for that unique binary inside of there. There's services from the hyperscale providers that can claim to comb hundreds and thousands of firewall logs in seconds when you're looking for a specific binary, like, hey, this JSON config file was calling to this command and control server and this variation of the malware. Where's that one binary? Boom, you run this, hyperscale service provider who's spinning up virtual GPUs. And so leveraging GPU computation as it relates to the world of cybersecurity is changing everything. And so it's not just pattern and file detection or password cracking or reading firewalls. It's essentially, Mark, giving, in my opinion, a super intelligence, because what it does is it amalgamates human intelligence with machine intelligence, and that's where I see it as a super intelligence. I don't necessarily like the word artificial, but at the end of the day, it's just to enhance. We saw that in AI with radiology imaging detection. We still have radiologists, but if that radiologist misses 1 out of 30,000 and it can increase from 98 to 99%, well, you've quantified saving life. And in cybersecurity, you have to quantify it differently. You have to say, what would an hour of an impact mean to me if my business was down? What if I was down for 2 weeks? What if I couldn't recover my data? It starts to get a little more serious. And so when time is not only money, but can many times be life in public sector and in health institutions, AI, my friend, is making that possible.
Yeah, it's funny. There's, you think about the human experience and somebody working at a job, they're not really destined or, properly trained to go through hundreds of pages of logs looking for a particular piece or a particular item that says they've been breached or they're vulnerable, or, they've opened up there's an attack vector and an imminent attack or any of that type of thing. They're just not prepared for that. So to your point, having the ability, using technology like machine learning, et cetera, to be able to go through there and look through this and find these little needles in the haystack is fundamentally critical, because as you add more and more, a lot of people now are doing security clouds, right? So everybody's moving to the cloud because of COVID and remote work. Well, guess what? Part of that is that all that data that's being generated is going to have to be reviewed. So somebody or something has to go through there and make determinations, especially like an after action. Imagine that, going through there and trying to find that stuff. So there's a lot to it. And I like you, I'm optimistic that, there are good technologies out there that are starting to look at this and use it for things that, it can be really in a powerful situation. That'll help many of these organizations, especially public sector organizations, do more with less. That's going to be fundamentally important, especially as we've seen. And I know you and I have touched on this before. The bad actors are becoming more sophisticated too. They're leveraging greater technology. To your point, 25 grand, and all of a sudden, your software as a service, you're up there, you're running your own ransomware, and so there's a lot to this.
Yeah, and just to follow up some more on the AI stuff, Mark, it's very encouraging because businesses can start to experiment fast. They'll essentially play around in the cloud in a container, and they'll bring it back on site. And whether this is for a new application or an application that's not currently doing something that you want it to do, or a cybersecurity weapon, whether it's offensive or defensive, GPU acceleration is changing the game. And most of those stacks are no cost. Containers that are prepackaged. I mean, you just kind of need the GPUs nowadays. There's so much wonderful work being done by the world of AI and sharing right now. You know, I watched how they synthesized the proteins on the big NVIDIA keynote, right? They're able to do a year's worth of work in a day. I mean, does that help get us a vaccine quicker? Of course, all this stuff does, you know, and so AI is not only helping people in the cybersecurity world, it's helping all walks of life. And so, but know that to get started, it's pretty easy. And you can experiment super easy. And Mark, the hyperscalers and the cloud providers right now are facing all the same challenges. And our businesses, as they spin up these infrastructures, we talked about that, using AI can regain an element of control, security, and intelligence. That would be the distillment of that, in my opinion. So it's changing our world rapidly. I love it. And that's why I've embraced AI as a software and cyber guy, because it's the future, my friend.
Yeah, that's really great points, Ray, because you know it is definitely seeping into many of the commercial applications the manufacturers are starting to provide, as well as into the cloud providers, because they realize as much as anybody else that to do all of this, you're going to have some kind of machine learning. You're going to have some kind of computational help to get through that. So. Well, look, I really appreciate you joining me today, and love the great insights. I know the audience will get a lot from that. And I just want to thank you for joining me today. And as we talk about innovative strategies for dealing with remote work and ransomware, right?
Mark, thank you. It was an honor and a pleasure. I'll leave the audience with this thought. Reach out to Netsync. We can work together to run a health check of your environment and let you know specifically how we can harden your environment, how we can enable the best practices and features that you've heard today. A lot of these are based on actual customer system data. So you already have the tools and the insights in your hand. We'd love to work with you to make that a secure future today. Thanks, Mark, for having us. We appreciate you a lot.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. By the way, just like Ray talked about, Netsync and NetApp are doing great things together. We do have some very strong strategies to increasing your security posture, protecting you from ransomware, as well as having a really fantastic business continuity plan that you can test and will work. So, well, I look forward to everybody catching us next time. And thanks again, Ray.
Thanks, Mark.